Have you ever woken up in the morning and wondered, is this all that's left for me? A quiet house, slower days, fewer people calling your name, and a strange feeling that life has somehow moved ahead without you. But what if I told you that some of the most meaningful, peaceful, and joyful days of your life are not behind you? They are still waiting right in front of you. What if happiness is not something you lost, but something you simply forgot how to notice? Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Harold. He was 68 years old. He lived in a small town, in a house that once felt full of life. The walls still held pictures of birthdays, family dinners, and laughter that seemed louder back then. But now, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Harold used to wake up early every morning, not because he had somewhere to go, but because he didn't know what else to do. He would sit by the window with his cup of tea, watching people pass by, young people rushing to work, children laughing on their way to school, life moving fast. While his felt like it had slowed down too much, he often thought, maybe my time has passed. He had worked hard all his life, 40 years at the same company. He raised his children, gave them everything he could, and made sure they had better lives than he did. And now, they did. They lived in different cities, busy with their own families, their own routines. They called sometimes, not every day, not even every week, but they called. And Harold would always say the same thing, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. But deep inside, he wasn't fine. There was a heaviness in his heart. Not pain exactly, but emptiness. A feeling that something was missing, even though he couldn't clearly explain what. Days started to look the same. Wake up, sit, eat, watch TV, sleep, repeat. One afternoon, Harold found himself staring at an old photo album. His hands moved slowly as he turned each page. There he was, younger, smiling, surrounded by people who loved him. There were moments of joy, moments of purpose. He whispered to himself, where did that man go? That question stayed with him. Days turned into weeks, and the silence inside his home started to feel louder than any noise outside. He stopped going out much. Even simple things like taking a walk felt unnecessary. What's the point? He would think. But one morning, something small happened. It wasn't big. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to start something. As Harold sat by the window, just like every other day, he noticed a little girl outside. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was trying to ride a bicycle. She kept falling, getting up, and trying again. Fall. Pause. Try again. Over and over. Harold watched her for a long time. At one point, the girl fell harder than before. She stayed on the ground for a few seconds. Harold leaned forward slightly, thinking maybe she would give up. But she didn't. She got up again, brushed the dust off her knees, and smiled. Actually smiled, before trying again. That smile caught Harold off guard. How can she smile after falling like that? He wondered. He kept watching, until finally, she did it. She rode the bicycle for a few seconds without falling. And when she did, she raised her arms slightly, laughing as if she had just won something big. And in that moment, something shifted inside Harold. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. For the first time in a long while, he felt something different. Not sadness, not emptiness, but curiosity. He asked himself, when was the last time I tried something and smiled? That question stayed with him the entire day. That evening, instead of sitting in front of the TV, Harold walked into his backyard. It wasn't much. Just a small patch of land with a few old plants that hadn't been taken care of in years. He stood there, looking at it. I used to enjoy this, he said softly. He remembered how he once spent hours planting flowers, trimming leaves, and simply enjoying the process. Not for anyone else, just for himself. The next morning, something unusual happened. Harold didn't go straight to the window. Instead, he stepped outside. The air felt fresh. The sun was gentle. He looked around like he was seeing his own backyard for the first time in years. He found an old pair of gloves, picked up a small tool, And slowly, carefully, he began. It wasn't easy. His hands weren't as strong as before. His back hurt after a few minutes. But he didn't stop immediately. He worked for 10 minutes, then rested. Then another 10 minutes. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. That day, nothing big changed on the outside. The garden didn't magically become beautiful. The world didn't suddenly notice him, but something inside him felt lighter. That evening, Harold sat down again. But this time, instead of thinking about what he had lost, he thought about what he had done. It wasn't much, he said, but it felt good. And for the first time in a long time, Harold went to sleep with a small sense of peace. Over the next few days, he continued, a little more each day. He started noticing things he had ignored for years. The sound of birds, the way sunlight changed throughout the day, the quiet beauty of simple moments. He wasn't chasing happiness. He was simply allowing himself to notice it. One morning, as he worked in the garden, the same little girl passed by. She stopped for a moment and looked at him. "Your plants are growing," she said with a bright smile. Harold smiled back. "Slowly," he replied. And then she said something that stayed with him. "Slow is okay. It still grows." Harold watched her walk away, and for a moment, he laughed softly. "Slow is okay," he repeated to himself. That became his new way of thinking. He stopped comparing his life to others, stopped thinking about how things used to be, and started focusing on what he could still do today. Simple things, small habits, moments that didn't seem important before, but now felt meaningful. Like making his tea and actually enjoying it, instead of just drinking it. Like stepping outside for a few minutes and feeling the air, instead of staying inside all day. Like picking up the phone and calling someone, instead of waiting for it to ring. These were not big changes, but they were powerful, because they reminded him of something he had forgotten. Life doesn't end when things slow down. Sometimes it begins again in a quieter, deeper way. And Harold was just beginning to understand that. This was only the start of his journey. But something had already changed. Not his age, not his past, but his perspective. And sometimes that's where real joy begins. The next morning, Harold woke up before the sun had fully risen. For a moment, he lay still in his bed, listening to the silence. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt calm. He slowly sat up, took a deep breath, and instead of asking himself, "What's the point of today?" he asked a different question. "What small thing can I enjoy today?" That one question changed the way his day began. He walked into the kitchen, made his tea, and instead of rushing through it, he held the cup in both hands. He noticed the warmth, the smell, the quiet comfort of the moment. It was such a simple thing, something he had done thousands of times before. But now, it felt different. It felt like he was actually there. Later that morning, Harold stepped outside again. The garden still had more weeds than flowers. The soil was uneven. Some plants looked too far gone to recover. A few weeks ago, he would have looked at this and thought, "This is too much. It's not worth it." But now, he didn't see a problem. He saw a process. He knelt down slowly, feeling the slight stiffness in his knees, and began clearing a small section. Not the whole garden, just one small part. As he worked, his mind didn't wander into the past like it used to. It stayed with his hands, the soil, the quiet rhythm of doing something simple and real. Minutes passed. Then an hour. When he finally stood up, his back ached a little, and his hands were dirty. But there was something else. A sense of progress. Not perfection, not completion, just progress. And for Harold, that was enough. Days started to take on a new shape. Not because his life had suddenly become exciting, but because he had started paying attention. One afternoon, while sitting outside, he noticed something unusual. A small bird had landed near the edge of his garden. It hopped around carefully, looking at the ground, then quickly picked something up and flew away. Harold watched it with quiet interest. The next day, it came back, and the day after that, it returned again. That tiny bird became part of his routine. something to look forward to, something that made his world feel connected. He even found himself speaking softly. "You're back again, huh?" It might sound small, almost unimportant, but for Harold, it meant something. It meant he was no longer just passing time. He was experiencing it. One evening, his phone rang. It was his son. "Hey, Dad. Just checking in. How are you doing?" Harold paused for a second. This question used to feel difficult. He would automatically say, "I'm fine," even when he didn't feel that way. But this time, his answer was different. "I'm doing better," he said honestly. There was a short silence on the other end. "Better?" his son asked. "Yeah," Harold replied. "I started working in the garden again, just a little each day." His son sounded surprised, but also relieved. "That's great, Dad. You used to love that." "I forgot," Harold said quietly. "But I'm remembering." After the call ended, Harold sat there for a while, thinking about what he had just said. "I'm remembering." It felt true. He was remembering what it meant to be present, to find value in small actions, to feel a quiet kind of happiness that didn't depend on big events or constant activity. But the journey wasn't perfect. Some days were still difficult. There were mornings when he woke up and felt that old heaviness again. Days when the silence felt too loud. Moments when memories came back, reminding him of people and times he missed deeply. On those days, it was tempting to go back to his old routine, to sit still, to do nothing, to let the day pass without meaning. And sometimes he did. But something had changed. Even on those difficult days, a small voice inside him would say, "Just try one small thing. Not everything. Just one thing." So on one of those harder mornings, Harold didn't go to the garden. He didn't feel like it. Instead, he simply opened a window. That was it. He let fresh air come in. He stood there for a few minutes, feeling the breeze on his face. It didn't solve everything, but it shifted something. Another day, he walked to the end of his street. Not far. Just enough to see something different. Enough to remind himself that the world was still there, and he was still part of it. Step by step, Harold was building something new. Not a busy life, not a loud life, but a meaningful one. One built on simple habits, one built on small moments, one built on the understanding that joy doesn't always come in big, exciting ways. Sometimes it arrives quietly, and you have to be still enough to notice it. One afternoon, as Harold worked in the garden, a neighbor walked by. They had seen him many times before, but never really spoke. "You've been spending a lot of time out here lately," the neighbor said. Harold nodded with a small smile. "Yeah, just taking it slow." The neighbor looked around at the garden. "It's looking better," they said. Harold paused for a moment and then replied, "So am I." The words surprised even him, but they felt right, because the garden wasn't the only thing growing. He was growing too. Not in the way people usually think. Not in career or status or achievement, but in awareness, in patience, in appreciation. He was learning that happiness wasn't something he needed to chase. It was something he needed to allow. That evening, as the sun began to set, Harold sat outside and watched the sky change colors. Orange, pink, then slowly fading into blue. He didn't rush inside. He didn't look at the time. He simply sat there and watched. And in that quiet moment, he realized something important. For years, he had been waiting for something big to bring him joy. A visit, a special event, a reason. But now, he understood. Joy had been there all along. In the small things, in the slow moments, in the simple act of being present. He just hadn't been looking. This realization didn't come with loud excitement. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden burst of energy. It came quietly, like a gentle understanding settling into his heart. And from that point on, Harold made a simple promise to himself. I won't ignore the small moments anymore, because he now knew that's where life was. And for the first time in many years, he wasn't just living his days. He was feeling them. As the days turned into weeks, Harold's life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became real in a way it hadn't felt for a long time. There was still silence in the house. Still moments when memories came back unexpectedly. Still evenings that felt a little too long. But something inside him had strengthened. He was no longer afraid of those moments. He understood them. One morning, Harold stood in front of the mirror, something he usually avoided. He looked at his face, the lines, the gray hair, the tired eyes that had seen many years. For a long time, he used to look at himself and think about what he had lost: his youth, his energy, his old life. But this time, his thoughts were different. "These lines," he said quietly, "they didn't come from nothing." He leaned a little closer. They came from living. For the first time, he didn't see age as something taken away from him. He saw it as something earned. That shift changed the way he carried himself that day. Not with pride, but with acceptance. And that acceptance gave him a kind of peace he had been searching for without even realizing it. Later that afternoon, Harold decided to do something he hadn't done in years. He picked up an old notebook from a drawer. The pages were slightly yellow, untouched for a long time. He sat down, held a pen in his hand, and paused. "What do I even write?" he thought. Then, slowly, he began. Not anything complicated, just simple thoughts. "Today I noticed the wind felt softer. The bird came back again. I worked in the garden for 20 minutes. I felt okay." That was it. No big words, no perfect sentences, but something about writing it down made it feel more real, more meaningful. It was like he was telling himself, "This matters. This moment counts." And day by day, that notebook began to fill. Not with big achievements, but with small, honest moments. Moments that, together, started to create a life that felt full again. One evening, while flipping through those pages, Harold stopped at one line he had written a few days earlier. "I laughed today, and I didn't expect to." He read it again, then smiled, because it was true. He had laughed, not because something amazing happened, but because he had allowed himself to feel light again. That realization hit him deeply. For so long, he believed joy had to come from something big, but now he knew. Sometimes joy comes when you stop forcing it and simply let yourself be. A few days later, Harold made another small decision. He walked to a nearby park. It wasn't far, but it felt like a bigger step than it should have been. He hadn't gone there in years. Back then, he used to take his children there. He remembered pushing swings, sharing snacks, watching them run freely. As he entered the park, those memories returned. For a moment, he felt that familiar ache in his chest. But this time, he didn't turn away. He kept walking. He sat on a bench and simply observed. People passing by. A couple talking quietly. An old man reading a newspaper. Children playing. Laughing without worry. Life was happening all around him. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel separate from it. He felt part of it. A young boy nearby was trying to fly a kite. The kite struggled to stay in the air, falling again and again. Harold watched him with quiet interest. It reminded him of the little girl with the bicycle. The same effort, the same determination. After several attempts, the boy looked frustrated. He almost gave up. Harold hesitated for a moment, then slowly stood up and walked toward him. "Need a little help?" Harold asked gently. The boy looked at him, unsure at first, then nodded. Harold took the string carefully, his hands slightly shaky, but his focus steady. "Sometimes," he said softly, "you don't fight the wind, you work with it." He adjusted the angle, waited for the right moment, and then released. The kite lifted. Not perfectly, but enough. The boy's face lit up. "It's flying!" he shouted. Harold smiled. "Yes, it is." He handed the string back and stepped away. As he returned to his bench, something inside him felt different. That small interaction, that simple moment of helping someone, it gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. Not because it was big, but because it was meaningful. He sat there for a while, watching the kite move in the sky. And then it came to him, a realization so simple, yet so powerful. I still have something to give. That thought stayed with him. For years, Harold believed his role in life had ended, that his time to contribute, to matter, to make a difference was over. But now, he saw it clearly. It wasn't over. It had just changed. Purpose didn't always come in big responsibilities or busy schedules. Sometimes it came in small actions. A kind word, a shared moment, a helping hand. And those small things could mean everything. That evening, Harold walked home a little slower than usual, not because he was tired, but because he was present. He noticed the sky again, the fading light, the calmness of the evening. And as he reached his door, he paused for a moment. He looked back at the street, at the world that once felt distant, but now felt close again. "I'm still here," he said quietly, and that means something. Inside the house, the silence was still there, but it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, because now Harold understood something he hadn't before. Life doesn't stop giving you meaning just because you've grown older. Sometimes it offers a deeper kind of meaning, one that isn't loud, one that doesn't demand attention, but one that stays steady and true. And Harold was beginning to live in that understanding, step by step, moment by moment, finding joy, not in what he had lost, but in what he still had. As time moved forward, Harold no longer counted his days the way he used to. He didn't wake up wondering how he would fill the time. He woke up with a quiet understanding that the day already had value, simply because he was there to live it. His mornings became gentle. No rush, no pressure, just his small beginnings. A cup of tea, a look outside the window, a deep breath that reminded him, "I am still here." The garden, once forgotten, had slowly transformed, not into something perfect, but into something alive again. Small flowers had started to bloom. The soil looked richer. The space felt cared for, just like him. One afternoon, Harold stood there, looking at the garden, and realized something that made him pause. "This didn't happen in one day," he whispered. "It took patience. It took consistency. It took showing up, even on the days he didn't feel like it." And in that moment, he understood something deeper. The garden was never just about plants. It was about rebuilding himself. Every small effort, every quiet moment, every simple habit had slowly brought him back to life. That evening, Harold sat inside with his notebook again. He flipped through the pages, reading the small moments he had written over the past weeks. At the beginning, the words felt heavy, uncertain, almost distant. But as he turned the pages, something changed. The sentences became lighter, warmer, more alive. "I enjoyed the sunlight today. I helped someone at the park. I felt peaceful this afternoon. I'm grateful for this moment." He stopped at the last line he had written that day. "I am not waiting for happiness anymore. I am noticing it." Harold closed the notebook slowly and leaned back in his chair. For a long time, he had believed that happiness was something that would come back into his life if the right things happened. If people visited more, if life became busy again, if things returned to how they used to be. But now he knew the truth. Happiness doesn't come from going backward. It comes from being present, from accepting where you are, and finding meaning within it. That realization didn't make his life loud or exciting in the way the world often describes success, but it made his life full. And for Harold, that was more than enough. A few days later, something unexpected happened. His daughter called. "Dad," she said, "we're thinking of visiting next month. It's been a while." Harold smiled, but this time, it was a calm, steady smile. "I'd like that," he said. After the call ended, he sat quietly for a moment. There was a time when he would have waited for this moment, depended on it, needed it to feel happy. But now, it felt different. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was already living, and that made the visit something to enjoy, not something to depend on. That evening, Harold stepped outside one more time. The sky was calm. The air was soft. The world moved at its usual pace. But inside him, there was no rush. He sat down, looked around, and allowed himself to feel the moment fully. No past pulling him back. No future making him anxious. Just this simple, quiet present. And then, in a soft voice, almost like he was speaking to himself, or maybe to anyone who needed to hear it, he said, "Joy doesn't disappear with age. It just becomes quieter." He paused. You don't need a perfect life to feel it. You just need to notice what's already there. He looked at his hands. Steady, calm. Hands that had worked, given, built, and lived. These small moments, they matter, he continued. A warm cup of tea, a short walk, a kind word, a little sunlight. He smiled gently. They are not small. They are life. There was no dramatic ending. No big celebration. No sudden change. Just a man, sitting peacefully, finally understanding something that had been in front of him all along. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding is what we all need. Because no matter your age, no matter your past, no matter how quiet your days may feel, there is still something beautiful waiting for you in each day. Not in big achievements, not in busy schedules, but in simple habits, in small moments, in the choice to be present. So if you're listening to this right now, take a moment, look around you, breathe. Notice something simple, something real, because that is where your joy begins. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of something important, take a second to support this channel, like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories that bring peace, purpose, and quiet strength into your life. Because sometimes, the smallest stories carry the biggest truths